psoas, a very important core muscle. How do we stretch it? Well, it stretches along with all of the other hip flexors. Remember that I said earlier, when we're in warrior one or a lunge, this position, which we might call basic lunge, or this position, warrior one, the hip flexors are stretching. The muscles that do this job are now being pulled back, and they're stretching. So all of the warrior postures, warrior 1 and 2 I should say specifically, will stretch your iliopsoas. There are other ways to stretch it as well. The deeper we go into a lunge, the deeper we stretch it. So for instance, if I take myself to a lunge in this position and eventually lower my hips further and further, different portions of the iliopsoas and rectus femoris are getting a deeper stretch. Now that brings us to what you might call the pelvic tilts. The pelvic bowl can tilt in different directions. If I start like this with a neutral hip and come down, and then I arch my back, I arch my lower back, I'm sending my front skeleton here towards my thigh, in which case I'm stretching my iliopsoas, but not so efficiently, because there's a lot more length that can be created. But if I start here and I tuck my pelvis, which is talked a lot about in Pilates and now in yoga, sometimes because of the Pilates influence, if I do what's known as a posterior tuck, then I keep that. This area is being pulled back, posterior tuck. Then I come down. I'm getting a much more efficient deep stretch in all of my hip flexor muscles. Let's experience these different pelvic tilts. The easiest way would be to lie on your back. So if you lie flat on your back and bend your knees, soles of the feet to the floor, soles of the feet flat, feet apart, hips distance, as though you're going to come into a bridge pose, if you know that posture. Now I want you all to feel your ASIS bones, the ones we talked about earlier. If you touch your fingertips just below your abdominals to those bony protrusions, you're touching the anterior superior iliac spine. Use your longest fingers and your index finger there, and use your thumb around your lower back. Good. Now, you're going to do what's known as very slowly today, even if you know this, very slowly, you're going to do anterior and posterior tilting. As you draw the ASIS up into the air and arch your lower back, you arch your lower back a little bit, and you're causing your pelvis to anteriorly tilt. In other words, the ASIS bones are moving forward towards the anterior portion of your body. By doing that, your lower back arches. Now the opposite, press your ASIS bones down towards the ground. Bring your sitting bones towards your heels, and that will flatten your lower back. That's the posterior pelvic tilt. Once again, the ASIS bones move towards the ground in the opposite direction. That's the posterior tilt. Let's do this in a combination. Inhale and arch your lower back, lift the ASIS, anterior tilt. Exhale, flatten the lower back, posterior tilt. Good. Let's come up to sit again. As a friend of mine mentioned to me recently, a very easy way to remember this is when we posteriorly tilt, we're making our lower back like a post, right? We're creating a flatter lower back. It's very important to understand, however, that we're not flattening our lower back first. We are tucking our tailbone down and bringing our ASIS bones in. The lower back flattening is a side effect. So, as a rule, what we can say is this. When we do forward bends, we'd like to keep an anterior pelvic tilt. When I come down in this direction, the more I can keep an anterior tilt for as long as possible, the more my back stays straight and the deeper the hamstrings stretch. Eventually, we lose the anterior pelvic tilt, even when we come all the way down. But the intention in a forward bend is an anterior pelvic tilt. In that way, my sitting bones rise away from my knees, so I get the greatest hamstring stretch. In a back bend, when we go backwards, we want to do the opposite. In a back bend, we'd like to see a posterior pelvic tilt. Let's all lie flat one more time. Do the same thing you did, but this time with the hands beside the body. We will come into bridge pose. Start yourself with a posterior pelvic tilt so that your lower back is flat. Puff out your chest, bringing the shoulder blades towards each other. Press into your heels and inhale, lift your hips up. As you raise your hips, you're probably going to want to arch your lower back, but try to keep it flat. Try to bring your sitting bones away from your shoulders. Still trying to keep the posterior pelvic tilt.